Okay, welcome everyone to the Canarian International Meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Marty and I am an alcoholic.
And my name is Mick, and I'm also an alcoholic, and we're both serving as your secretary today. Please join us in a moment's silence to remember the still suffering alcoholic, both inside and outside this meeting.
There you are, Stephen, you're unmuted.
Hi, my name's Stephen. I'm an alcoholic. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. AA has no dues or fees. It is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. Thanks.
Thanks, Stephen. And a very warm welcome goes out to any newcomers or anyone returning to Alcoholics Anonymous.
The chat is now disabled until the end of the meeting, except for the meeting hosts. If you feel the meeting security is at risk at any time during this meeting, please private message one of the co-hosts and they can check it out.
And that's it, folks. Today we're at a special meeting. Millie is joining us today to give us a bit of history lesson on Marty Mann, and from there on, it's all yours, Millie.
Okay,
and
fantastic.
Thanks a million for joining us today.
Oh, absolutely. I'm thrilled to be here. My name is Miley, and I'm an alcoholic, and I live in San Francisco, California. I'm so happy to be here. My sobriety date is July 13th, 1984, all thanks to Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm going to be telling my story here in a couple of weeks, I believe, so you can come find out how on earth I came in. We'll get to that. But one of the ways I've stayed very active in AA was just becoming very fascinated with the history. And specifically Marty Mann. That's led to two other talks that I give. I give a talk about Florence R., she's the only woman in the first edition Big Book. Her story is called A Feminine Victory. And then I also give a talk about 7 early LGBTQ people from the 1930s and 1940s. That's very interesting. But today we're going to talk about Marty, and we are going to get this going. I always have to talk my way through it. Okay, let's see. Share sound. Do this. This is all part of the fun. It's just getting it going here. And then I get the slideshow. I've been doing this for 7 years, and each time it's exciting. Let's see. Share your cancel. Okay, how's that looking? You just see the poster in none of my notes?
That's perfect.
Okay, good. Thank you. All righty, so here we are at the Canarian International Group. And again, I'm so pleased to be here. Anytime I'm doing anything with Alcoholics Anonymous, it's a blessing. So I'd like to start out, except for the audio recording we're doing today, I ask that people do not take any photos or record any videos. And that's because I've been given permission to use these images by different archives and universities around the world. And the understanding is that I'm doing them specifically for AA and AA type meetings. So we don't want it on YouTube, and there's issues of anonymity and all sorts of things. But so again, I appreciate you doing that. However, I do have a bibliography. I'm happy to share all the information I have. If you email me, and I'll share my email later in the chat, and I'd be very happy to send you, all sorts of things that show you how I found the audio recordings, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of the information I'm going to share today is from this fantastic biography. It's called A Biography of Mrs. Marty Mann, the First Lady of Alcoholics Anonymous. And you'll see a few things. You'll notice that Mrs. is in italics, so we'll be discussing that. And then the First Lady of AA, is Marty really the First Lady, and what does that even mean? And then these are the biographers, Sally and David Brown. I had the great good fortune to meet Sally Brown in 2019, actually just a little bit before she passed. And I've become friendly with all of their kids. All four of their adult children are lovely. And they've given me permission to share that Sally had 42 years of sobriety when she passed at the age of 96. And her husband, David, was a grateful member of Al-Anon. So I'm just so happy I got to meet her and I got to tell her about how I give these talks at conferences and things like that. And they really did such a good job on the book. I mean, sometimes people say, "Oh, Miley, you should write a book." I'm like, nope, I don't need to, because a great book has already been written. So I'm happy about that. However, since the book was published, I have done a lot of research. I've been to Syracuse University, which is in New York State, and that's where Marty Mann has her personal archives. Brown University, that's in Rhode Island. And I've been there. That's where the National Council on Alcoholism has their archives, as well as Dr. Bob. His archives are there. Stepping Stones, that's the historic home of Bill and Lois Wilson in New York State. If you're ever in New York and you have the opportunity, it's just like maybe a little over an hour train ride from Manhattan. It's so easy to get there. And that is Bill and Lois's home. You can also go to their website, which is steppingstones.org. You can see a lot of the things that are there. And I've donated, over the years, I've collected things related to Marty Mann. I've, autographed books and photographs I found on eBay and just all sorts of things. And I've since donated them to Stepping Stones. So my Marty Mann collection is there and you can see it. Recovery speakers. It's not a good time for all of you. Most of you, I would say, but it's at 6 p.m. in the US, but they do record all of their talks. All of my talks have been recorded and they're with recovery speakers, but you can also get on an email list where they will send you a recording this is all for free. Every day by email. And if you're interested in history, it's pretty neat. Now, the AA Grapevine, it's the International Journal of AA. I know it may mainly be known in the US. I'm not sure. I know that a lot of different countries have your own magazines, which is amazing. The Grapevine, if you're interested in the early days, if you get a digital subscription, you can read every grapevine that's ever been published online. And that's been very helpful for me in, doing these history presentations. Then there's Vogue magazine. That's the fashion magazine, newspapers.com, ancestry.com, General Service Office in New York. That's another place you can visit in Manhattan, which is pretty neat. And you can go there and you can see Bill Wilson's desk, or you can sit on his couch and see the desk, all sorts of things. It's a pretty magical place to visit. And then there's the Tate Library and Archive. And yes, that's the Tate in London. And I will be explaining that a little bit later. One of my most valuable resources was interviewing a woman named Lori D. of Santa Fe, New Mexico. She is still my friend, and she's been sober since 1967. And she knew Marty Mann when she was a newcomer in the 1960s. And so she has been able to share a lot about Marty's personality and her impressions. And so that's pretty neat. So this is Marty Mann's birth certificate. She was born in 1904 in Chicago. These are her parents, Father William, Mother Lillian. And Marty was born to a very, very, very wealthy family. They were actually, excuse me, multimillionaires. And it's a pretty big deal to be a multimillionaire nowadays. But can you imagine in 1904 to be a multimillionaire? That's a lot of money. And Marty was the oldest. There were two twins, as you can see, and then her sister, Chris. And the siblings remained close their entire lives. So that was certainly a blessing. And then she was, again, born in Chicago, and her father was in the department store business. And so this is, again, she's age 13. Now, this is Marty went to finishing school. She went to boarding school in New York, and then she went to finishing school in Florence, Italy. So that sort of, again, speaks to the kind of wealth they were living in. Most Americans were not going to finishing school in Florence, Italy. So now another thing is that, Marty eloped with John Blakemore in 1927, and this is their wedding certificate that I found at Brown University. And, they met at a high society party in New Orleans. And John already had a reputation as a problem drinker, but that did not deter Marty. She thought, well, that's terrific. That's my kind of guy. And so they ran off without telling anyone, which I think is one of the first red flags of alcoholism. I mean, especially given the sort of status of Marty's family. That is not what very wealthy Americans were doing back then. They were not eloping. They were not running across the Mississippi River in the South and getting married without even telling your parents. I mean, that would be extremely shocking, especially for that, high society. But Marty realized that she'd made a terrible mistake. It only took 3 months for her to realize that maybe she had been a bit impulsive, and she filed for divorce just 3 months later. And she had to go to New Mexico, and that's over more on the West Coast, or the Western United States, I should say. And because it's easier to get divorces out here. And so, and they, of course, had a ranch in New Mexico. So she went out to the family ranch and filed for divorce. Now, I found these certificates at Syracuse University, and that's in New York, upstate New York. Now, a few very interesting things. One is, well, number one, it's interesting that she could even get a divorce. That was definitely a sign of her class. Many, many people made mistakes getting married, but then they had to live with those mistakes the rest of their lives. But because of her wealth, she was able to kind of navigate the system and to get out of it. Now, the other interesting thing is that she asked the judge to return her maiden name. And the maiden name, of course, is the name that many women are born with. If a woman changes her name when she gets married, that's her married name. So she wanted to go back to her maiden name, and which of course was Mann. The judge granted her that, said, okay, you can now be known as Marty Mann again. However, Marty would continue to introduce herself as Mrs. Marty Mann for the rest of her life. She never remarried, but for the rest of her life, she would introduce herself. She'd say, I'm Mrs. Marty Mann. Hello, I'm Mrs. Marty Mann. And in AA events, she'd always be introduced. There are many, many, many wonderful audio recordings of Marty speaking. And each time said, and now, Mrs. Marty Mann, et cetera, et cetera. So, and just the fact that they're using her last name is also interesting. But the fact that Mrs. is, I always like to feel like she was trying to hypnotize the nation to be like, I'm Mrs. Marty Mann, I'm married, etc. And I think it protected her in many, many ways throughout her life. And I'll get to that a little bit later. Now, Marty's father lost the entire family fortune as a result of his gambling. He filed for bankruptcy. This is very interesting. 17 days prior to the stock market crash. Now, when people think of the United States in 1929, they think of the Great Depression, of course, the stock market crash, but that's not how he lost his money. He lost it as a result of gambling and also drinking. So sadly, her father never did really recover. He never was able to get sober, despite their efforts. So the family had nothing. It's very interesting. The mansions they grew up in, they did not own them. They rented them, which is sort of unusual. And so when he lost everything, they did not even have, a home. They never regained their money. The family was poor for the rest of their lives. So Marty was able to kind of read the room. She went to New York for a year. She worked in magazines. And then she realizes it's time for me to go to England. So she did. She moved to England for 5 years. I found this on Ancestry.com. It shows how she traveled. She was called the shipping line, called the French line. She landed in Plymouth, England. She arrived on December 26, 1930. And I believe that she knew this group of women before she arrived, because it even had the address of where she was staying, and she was staying with a group of women. How she met them, I don't know, but I would like to know that. Now, the Tate Library, thank you so much to the Tate Library and Archive. I was able to find, this is a wonderful photo of Marty there wearing a tie. And then that's her. She fell in love with a woman named Barbara Kerr Seymour. Now, the reason this is even in the Tate Library is because Barbara Kerr Seymour was a successful photographer at that time. So they were together for several years. This is me, happy as a clam, standing in front of the Tate Britain. I am so excited. And this is in 2022. So I'm wearing my mask. I've got my little archive gloves on, and I'm holding a love letter that is from Marty to Barbara. So you can only imagine. Like I said, I've probably given this talk, I don't know, 3, 4, 5. I don't even know how many hundreds of times I've given this talk. I am extremely interested in this topic. So for me to be there and holding things just was really a thrill. I'm just going to read the first paragraph of the letter, but the whole thing's pretty wonderful. It says, Friday night, May 1st, and again, 1931. Marty's in Paris. She's writing to Barbara, who's in London. She says, my own darling baby, I miss you so terribly, but it's like an awful empty ache every time I come back to this room. I curse the fact that you aren't here, and every time I go out of it, I long for you to be going with me. I love you so much, my sweetie. I wish I'd had a letter from you tonight. Now, this is a fantastic photograph. There's so many great photos of them vacationing in the south of France with these friends, all sorts of very interesting people. And I always have to rotate my slides around because I probably have like 400 slides at this point, but I really only have time to show 80 of them at any given time. But this one's a great representative. They're partying. These are all women in the photo. They're having a good time. And, yeah, good times. That's Marty, the second from the right. And you don't see, well, the two of the women are wearing trousers. You didn't see that often back then, but they were having good times. And in Toulon, France, that actually happened to be the home of the French Navy. So some of their friends they really had a kick. And back then, a lot of the nightclubs, they'd like to dress up in military uniforms, like not military people would dress up as like sailors and things. That was a very popular thing to do back then. So Marty's last real job was at the Royal Opera House in London. I had the opportunity to go there last year. I liked it whenever I'm traveling and I'm in a city where Marty's been, and she's been a lot of places. I like to sort of try to visit if I can. I love to travel. And so that is the Royal Opera House, and this is what it looks like, and that's me in the corner. So that was her last real job before everything went to heck in a handbasket. Now I'm going to play an audio recording of Marty telling her story, and she's going to explain what happened to her in 1935 in England. So you may need to turn up your volume, see how it goes, but here it is.
It was a big party. A lot of Americans sent it to the 4th of July party, and I disappeared early, shortly after we arrived. I wasn't feeling very well, and I couldn't be found. And pretty soon I was found, and I was found on the terrace in pieces. And I had fractured my leg up near the hip, and I fractured my jaw on both sides, and I knocked out all my lower teeth, and I bit the sides off my tongue. And here we were in a little town way off in nowhere. And I had to stay in that hospital just the way I was until I could be got into the Royal National Orthopedic Hospital in London.
So that's alcoholism, right? I mean, so many serious physical injuries. But was that enough for her to say, I'm not going to drink again? No, of course not. That's not how alcoholism works, right? No, she was unable to stop drinking despite the very serious consequences. Now, let's also think 1935. What else is happening in 1935? Well, over here, we see Bill Wilson carrying the message of hope to Dr. Bob. And just a little bit of geography. Bill and Lois Wilson live in Brooklyn, New York. Dr. Bob and Ann Smith live in Akron, Ohio. So already it's just incredible. It's just a miracle that Bill even found Dr. Bob. And that's a story for another day. And I'm sure all of you know it. But I mean, it's pretty incredible. Talk about a needle in a haystack. That Bill would be traveling on business and that he would meet this fellow, a medical doctor, Dr. Bob, had a terrible alcoholism, and that they were able, and these are their wives. Lois Wilson, she would go on to co-found Al-Anon, and then Ann Smith. Many people regard her as just a saint, and Bill Wilson would often call Ann Smith the mother of AA. So that's what's happening. So there's Marty over there in the hospital in England, and this is what's happening over here. Little by little, very slowly, tiny steps, AA is beginning to be born, and thank God for that. So Marty she just had a terrible time. She even went up to Scotland for a while to try to recuperate. Then she came back to London, just drinking. Barbara had already said, yeah, enough of you, goodbye. But Barbara did help her. She would Marty would go to Hyde Park and rent a chair, and you can still do that today. And she would sit there and just drink all day. And then Barbara would find her and say, "You've got to go home. You've got to go back to America. You're going to die here. This is terrible." But Marty didn't have any money because she couldn't work. I mean, because of her drinking, she could not work. And so the friends chipped in, all those friends she had partied with, they chipped in. And the Queen Mary is a really big deal. It had only been around 6 months. It was a gorgeous ship. People would have been a real thrill for anyone to be on that. And, just the top of the top, right? And but Marty was in a blackout the entire time. She remembers nothing of the trip. And the biography tells us that when they arrived in New York, I mean, she missed everything, the Statue of Liberty, the whole thing, everything. And every single person got off of the Queen Mary. And then the very last, and it's freezing. They say that the mother and her sister Chris were there. It was like 40 degrees. It was Christmas time. They were freezing out there, waiting for Marty to come off. And finally, the very last person to get off was Marty. And she was carried off the ship on a stretcher, too drunk to walk. That was her big hero's welcome. So clearly they could see she had trouble. I don't think they realized how bad things were for Marty. There's nothing like seeing is believing when it comes to alcoholism. And so it took a while. Marty knew she wanted to get help, and she went to many different doctors trying to get help for her condition. She had heard about other people going to asylums, so she was open to that. And she said that one time she went to see one psychiatrist, and they said maybe she'd had a tropical disease, that maybe that explained her behavior. So clearly, people did not know a lot about alcoholism. So she was admitted to Bellevue Hospital in New York, which is sort of considered like a public hospital, a place, you would not expect a wealthy person, or certainly someone of her stature back then, to arrive in Bellevue. But that's where she was. And one of the things I've heard her say in her audio recordings, she says, there was plenty of blue blood running through the vials in the lab, meaning that there were many wealthy people that had crashed out and landed in Bellevue. So she was there for 6 months. Now it's interesting, I always think about the AA promises about no matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience benefits others. And Marty never, ever shied away from talking about all of her experiences of being in asylums, of, all the ways that alcoholism impacted her life. And she was a charity case. So after 6 months, they said, you know what? We feel like we've done what we can for you. Do you feel like you're ready to go home? She said, no, I'm not ready to go home. I'm afraid to leave. I don't know what's wrong with me. I do not want to leave. And that is rare. Most people, when they're in a psychiatric hospital, are saying, get me out of here, right? Not Marty. She said, no, I'm afraid. I don't know what's wrong. They transferred her to an asylum in Connecticut, again, as a charity case. And it's called Blythewood Sanitarium. It's in Connecticut. And this is from an advertisement. It says, complete facilities for the study and treatment of nervous and mental disorders. Some of you might recognize the name Harry M. Tebow, MD. He was the physician, and he was Marty's physician. Now, the big book is not even written yet, right? I mean, AA is just in the beginning stages. Dr. Tebow had never heard of AA, right? But then, luckily, when the big book was published, before it was printed as we know it, as a proper book, they did a mimeograph, right? And they sent it out. It's called like a pre-publication copy. And they sent it out to rabbis and priests and ministers and psychiatrists and doctors and just anyone they thought, mainly in the New York area, wanting to get feedback, saying, let us know what you think. What do you think of this book? Are there any corrections? Is there anything you think we should do different, et cetera, et cetera? And so Dr. Tebow received it. And I mean, again, sometimes you'll hear people talk about these golden threads in AA. The fact that Bill found Dr. Bob, the fact that they happened to send this mimeograph copy to Dr. Tebow, right? I mean, what if he hadn't read it? What if he, I mean, there's so many things. And so anyway, he read it. And apparently he was just a fantastic guy. He was very patient, especially with Marty. And he would go on to be Bill Wilson's doctor because Bill Wilson would suffer from depression. And Dr. Tebow was his psychiatrist for quite a long time. And he remained a good friend of AA until the rest of his life. No, I mean, until he died. So this is a Grapevine article written by Bill Wilson, and it's when Dr. Tebow died in 1966. And it says, in memory of Dr. Harry M. Tebow, and this is what Bill wrote. Says, and he's talking about when Dr. Tebow gave the big book to Marty Mann to read. And I'm still talking about the mimeograph version, right? And it says, at first, the book made little impression on this pair. And the pair means Marty and her friend named Granny, who is a guy. And Granny would go on to marry Marty's sister, Chris, which is just a funny little thing. So at first, this book made little impression on this pair. Indeed, its heavy larding with the word God so angered Marty that she threw it out her window. It flounced off the grounds of the Swank Sanitarium where she was, and she proceeded to tie on a big bender. So again, Dr. Tebow was very patient. Marty said that, and she could leave the grounds. So it wasn't like a super locked sanitarium. They were allowed to go on different things. So she would get alcohol and she would drink. And so she would come back and say, oh, I can't stand that book. And Dr. Tebow, he like sounded like he would agree with her and be like, oh, yes, I see what you mean. Well, let's just read one more chapter. And then they read one more chapter and she'd be like, oh my, the God stuff and this and that and blah, blah, blah. And he'd be like, oh, I see what you're saying. Let's just read one more chapter. She says before she ever went to her first meeting, she had read the entire big book, including all the stories, 3 times before she had ever even been to a meeting. So she, Dr. Tebow was really something. Now we're going to hear an audio recording of Marty Mann talking about going to her first meeting. And her first meeting was at 182 Clinton Street in Brooklyn, New York. This is a private home, so do not ring the doorbell. And I'm always proud to say I just stayed right on the lower step there. But, many people go there just to see it because that's where Bill and Lois lived. And that was actually Lois Wilson's family home. I believe Lois was born in that house. And and one very interesting thing, well, many interesting things, but one is that Marty Mann's first meeting was April 11th, 1939. And it took me, one thing about giving this talk for like 7 years now is I keep learning new things. And I kept looking at that date, saying, God, that date just seems so familiar. Well, finally, I thought it occurred to me, right, the big book was published one day before, April 10th, 1939, right? So you can imagine how exciting that must have been for Marty to attend a meeting basically the day after the books arrived. I mean, the books were there, they were opening it up, they had boxes. That is extremely exciting for them. They've been working on that book for a long time. So that was really neat. And again, so here's Marty's audio recording. Here we go.
Into that. Well, in the first place, we went on the subway and met a couple of other people on the subway that were going over to Brooklyn. And they told me afterwards I was the most wild-eyed looking dame they'd ever seen. Well, I was scared witless. I'd had a very nice dinner with 3 people. I could manage that. But I didn't know how many people were going to be where we were going, or again, what they were going to be like. And we got to this house in Brooklyn, and we went in, and it looked to me like there were dozens and dozens and dozens of people there. There weren't really that many. There weren't that many of us then. But I went upstairs to leave my coat, and I didn't come down. I don't know how long I thought I'd get away with it. But a very nice woman came upstairs, and she put her arms around me, and she said, we're all waiting for you downstairs. We want you. My name is Lois. And so I've always kind of felt, ever since, that Lois was as much my sponsor as Bill.
So, I mean, thank goodness for these recordings, right? I mean, there's nothing better than hearing Marty's voice directly. And we learn a lot. First of all, we learn Bill Wilson was her sponsor. He was her sponsor for the rest of his life, right? That's amazing. But she's also saying that Lois Wilson was just as much her sponsor. And it's interesting because sometimes, at least over here, you'll hear like, oh, of course, it was very challenging for women joining AA in the beginning. But sometimes people say, well, it was the wives of the alcoholics. They did not want these women coming in. And I'm sure there's some truth to that. But more and more, and also there's a great recording of that I share in my Florence R talk of Nell Wing, AA's first archivist, saying that it was often the wives who helped these women. They were the ones that brought them in and sat with them and explained AA. It wasn't so much the husbands, but it was the wives. So that's very interesting. This is a good example of that. So now Marty stayed at Blythewood for 6 more months. So it's not like she went to her first AA meeting and checked out of the hospital. She stayed there. And Bill and Lois Wilson would go to Connecticut and visit her there. They very much wanted her to succeed. Very much. They wanted her to be in AA. They wanted to have a woman join them. In Akron, Ohio, it was a different story. Dr. Bob did not really want women to join AA, and I'm sure he came around for sure. But at first, I think they were overwhelmed, which I understand, and I think they were just trying to keep it together. But Bill Wilson was always quite progressive, as was Lois, and just being like, no, we want women here, and we really hope this woman makes it. So this is a letter from Virginia, and a woman, she was also a wife of an alcoholic. And this is the letter's from 1960, but she's talking about when Marty was at the sanitarium, again in 1939. Says, she's writing to Bill and she's reminiscing. Says, you asked me if I would be willing to go up to a sanitarium in Connecticut and get a young woman alcoholic who needed help. She needed to get into a private home, away from the institutional influence of the SAN for a while. And by SAN, they mean sanitarium. I went up to get Marty Mann to bring her home for a few days with us. Do you remember this, Bill? What an experience. I had never been to a SAN. I will never forget my first sight of Marty pacing the floor in such a state of utterness, a state which scared me so badly I could hardly move or talk. She was not dressed, and I said, are you ready to come with me? She said, well, what should I wear? Anyway, I finally got some clothes on her and got her home. The impact of that experience will never leave me, ever. However, the next day, I got her up to Ray Campbell at Carmel, and he took over. And I never have seen such a miracle as the change that came over Marty. I have seen so many miracles in AA that I should be hardened to them, but I'm still just as bowled over by them now as ever. Marty stayed with us for 5 days, right? I mean, just that level of service, right? I mean, when's the last time you or I went to a mental institution and brought someone into our home for 5 days? I guarantee I've never done that. And, I mean, just really something, and the reason they went there, well, I mean, anyway, I could go on and on about Dr. Tebow and this and that, but I got to keep moving here. But anyway, Ray Campbell is an important person because he's the person who drew the cover of the big book. And I discussed that in my Florence talk because there were very many kind of, in my opinion, hilarious covers before they came to that red and yellow first edition. So anyway, and his stories also in the big book, the first edition, called An Artist Concept. And it's really interesting because when you hear about them going to these meetings, I mean, especially in New York, half the people in the room were big book authors, right? I mean, that's who wrote the big book, was just the people sitting around the room. So I had the opportunity, I went to Blythewood Sanitarium. There's very little left of it, except for a chapel. So I wrote to the minister. The chapel's on the property of a more modern church now. So I wrote the minister of the modern church, and I said, hi, my name's Miley, I live blah, 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 and I'm interested in someone who lived at Blythewood. I was just wondering, would it be okay with you if I just visited the chapel briefly? I just, I'm visiting, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, he was lovely. And he said, yes, he knew nothing about anything that we're talking about today, but he was lovely. And I brought him a copy of the biography written about Marty, just so he would know that someone really special had been there. And I think a lot of special people were actually at the sanitarium. But anyway, he was so nice. And I went with Sally, who's the director of Stepping Stones, the historic home of Bill and Lois, because she lives in New York. And I'm in California. Where I live, we don't have any kind of weather. And thank goodness. But so it was snow. I could never drive in the snow. I mean, maybe I could, but I choose not to. I don't want to endanger anyone. So anyway, she drove me there, and it was so appreciated. So anyway, the minister said, "Hey, would you like to ring the bell?" I'm like, "Are you kidding me? I would love to ring the bell." And so that's what I got to do. So I love to think that Marty heard that bell, all the people that were there. Some people think Judy Garland were there. The minister said he had heard that Judy Garland had also been a patient there. So very interesting. Now, Marty's still at Blythewood Sanitarium, and this is an interesting letter. My friend Mike, who does recovery collectibles, he's very generous with me, and whenever he finds anything, he'll send me photos, and it's so nice. So he owns this letter. And it says, "Dear Mr. Amos, I'm enclosing my check for $5. This is my pledge towards Bill Wilson's salary, covering June 15th to July 15th. Yours sincerely, Marty Mann." Now, most people agree salary's really not quite the correct word, probably, because he wasn't an employee of anyone. But the issue is that Bill wanted to get a job, but they finally got this big book out, and he's like, Lois had been the one working, his wife, this whole time. Lois had been the one going to work, bringing home the bacon, if you will. And he said, "I've got to get a job. This is crazy." And the people of AA were like, "For God's sake, Bill, we finally wrote this book. You need to get this book into the hands of the people. You cannot just go get some job. We need to get this message out to the world." So he was like, "Oh my God." So anyway, so people would chip in $5 here, $5 there. They even lost their home in Brooklyn, that one where Marty went to her first meeting. Within a year of her first meeting, they had lost that home. So Bill and Lois would stay in people's garages. They would stay in AA clubhouses. For 2 years, they did not have their own home until they finally moved to what we call Stepping Stones. And that's a permanent home where you can still visit. So the biography tells us that the major factor in Marty's acceptance by the men was Bill Wilson's attitude. He and Marty hit it off immediately. They were cut from the same piece of cloth, both of them visionary, charismatic, open-minded, and entrepreneurial, right? And, that's how it works, right? Bill's good attitude and Bill's welcoming spirit, people looked to him, and then they said, "Okay, well, if that's how Bill feels, then that's how I feel." Now, I'm going to play another audio recording of Marty speaking. I think this is terrific. And I think it's a great example of how she really was a visionary. So here you go.
Wonderful someday for all across the country. And in every big city like Cleveland, we could find an AA group. And everybody roared with laughter. Most ridiculous idea in 1939. And now look at the damn thing.
But it's really something, because it really does take a visionary to be like, okay, we're in New York now, or we have some people in Cleveland, we have some people in Akron, Ohio, but she's saying, wouldn't it be neat if we could be in every town in America, if we could, and Marty would then travel internationally to carry the message. So again, now some of you may have heard about this article. It's in the Saturday Evening Post. This was really a turning point for AA. This is when the average, public person learned about it. The Saturday Evening Post, very popular magazine, and you can read about it online. But this is another example where it honestly took me years to figure out, where I was looking at it and I realized that there's a story of a woman named Sarah Martin, and I'm like, Of course, that's Marty Mann. It's simply a pseudonym. So so even Marty Mann was in the Saturday Evening Post article, and this really did influence her perspective because she saw how it changed everything for AA, and she really understood the power of public education, and that would then lead to the rest of her life. Now, back to Marty's personal life. Marty met a woman named Priscilla, and they were romantic partners for 40 years. Now, I very much think that Marty and Priscilla knew each other when Marty was still drinking. Even Marty's brother thought that Priscilla sometimes would send her money to Blythewood, to help give her a little spending money. And also because they were lesbians, the as we would call like the gay scene back then was like very, very small and closeted and, secret. So, I mean, if in the gay bars, everyone would know everyone in the gay bars in New York in the 1930s and 1940s. So anyway, Priscilla Peck. Now this photo is them on Cherry Grove. That is part of Fire Island. Fire Island is part of Long Island, part of New York. And I finally had the opportunity to visit there a year or two ago. But Marty started AA there, and so back then, even still, the Fire Island is a big island, and then there's two towns. There's called the Pines and Cherry Grove. Cherry Grove, there's more women there, but also anyway, just there's different crowds go to different places. But back when they went, a lot of famous artists, a lot of people from Broadway went there, and people like Tennessee Williams, Truman Capote, Patricia Highsmith, Paul and Jane Bowles, Carson McCullers, Janet Flanner, and W.H. Auden, Brit, right? Now, these people have a lot in common, but one is they're all LGBTQ, and based on the biographies I've written, we're not to say other people are alcoholics, but I can safely say that I think a lot of them may have been real problem drinkers. So in the biography, it tells us that both women were well known in Cherry Grove as lesbians and as recovered alcoholics. And so Call Marty became a standard SOS among some of America's most famous art, literary, and theater names. Now, my friend Lori D., the woman I mentioned earlier who got sober in 1967, she told me Marty had a coterie of very famous gay people around her in New York. They went to Fire Island, but they lived very closeted lives. It was not public knowledge. We knew she was gay, and there were probably some straight friends that were sworn to silence. Marty helped to start the first Cherry AA group that continues to this day, and it's every night at 6 p.m. at the firehouse. So that's pretty neat. That's what it looks like there. So this is Stepping Stones, where you can visit. You just call ahead, let them know you're coming. And they had a guest book back then in 1941, 1942, 44. And this shows that Marty Mann signed in 1941. Priscilla Peck signed in 44. You see that they're living at the same address. And in Lois Wilson's diary, she mentions that Marty and Priscilla came by to visit. Now, these, I'm sure, were special events. I doubt they signed a guest book every time they walked in the door, but these were for special events. Now, Felicia G., this is very interesting. She has a terrific story in the big book. It's called Stars Don't Fall. And she was a straight woman, but Marty was her sponsor. And she says, Priscilla in AA, who, like Marty, has become one of my greatest friends, decided that I was a stubborn case. Now, this is very interesting because not very many people have their names in the AA Big Book, right? But Marty and Priscilla do, and it has them living together. But Felicia's a fascinating person. Now, this is Priscilla on the left, and the biography tells us that Priscilla's star was about to rise in spectacular tandem to Marty's, right? She remained at Vogue magazine for 25 years. She was the art editor there, and you can only imagine how glamorous that was. Vogue magazine in the United States back in the 1940s, 50s, that's about as fancy as you can get. So this shows at Syracuse, I was able to look at Marty's. These are called autodexes. I know my grandparents had them where you could go up and down to get your address. And it shows Priscilla's number here in the copy room and the night number, and pretty neat. Now, this is in 1944, at the age of 40, Marty founds the National Committee for the Education on Alcoholism. And when you think about this, think about things like, I don't know I should learn, but the equivalent things in Ireland and England around the world. But in the United States, we would say the American Cancer Society, the American Diabetes Association, the tuberculosis committee, etc. These were things that already existed. And the idea was, how do we educate the American public about these diseases, right? So Marty says, well, alcoholism is a disease, so I want to create something like this so the general public can understand blah, blah, blah. So one of her executives, who was a very good friend of hers, said, Marty had an ego and a will the size of Mount Everest, but Marty's ego was without arrogance. She would drop everything to lend a hand to any alcoholic seeking her help. Now, my friend Lori D said, Marty would go to any length to help an alcoholic. Back in the day, you detoxed people on your couch. The treatment center was your couch. That was the era, and Marty would drop anything because she knew the likelihood of our dying was incredible. Marty got into the trenches, and all of her social class stuff fell away. If there was a Skid Row person, they were as deserving of her time as a socialite. That was the passion, and that's what she meant when she talked about carrying the message. Now, this is a brand new slide. This is a desk that just arrived at Stepping Stones. This is Marty Mann's desk from when she worked. I want to go back to that picture I just showed you. This desk right here now lives at Stepping Stones. It wasn't a private collection, so it's really a thrill that we can now all see it. Has a little coffee ring on it, and that's where Marty did a lot of her wonderful work. So very exciting. Now, Marty would travel the country and eventually the world carrying the message about the National Council. And we're going to find out soon there were issues around anonymity, and the traditions. But at first, she's just out there saying alcoholism is a disease. There should not be a stigma, etc. I'm going to be in Minneapolis in October speaking. And so I got this great slide. And this photo shows Marty and these two women who are not alcoholics, but Marty is showing them that even at a cocktail party, you can serve fruit, which really made me laugh so hard. I think that's ridiculous. But they're all holding up different fruits. And you don't need to serve alcohol. You can serve fruit. So that was a great photo. So the Grapevine, in 1944, Marty, Priscilla, and 4 other AAs co-founded the AA Grapevine magazine. And this happened in Marty and Priscilla's New York apartment when they first talked about a magazine devoted to AA and alcoholism. It says Priscilla, who's the art editor of Vogue, designed the title page. She drew the grapes hanging on the vines as a background. Then she drew the grapevine as a title in big black letters, almost an inch high. So that is exactly what it used to look like for the first several years. Now, this is really, really special. And this is from my friend Mike, who he's quite a collector. And he found this like in South Dakota, all places. And he was in like the driveway. He had just bought it from someone. And it just is amazing. And I love that it says her full name so that we know it's her. I think we could guess it's her, but there's nothing better than sometimes having a first and last name. One thing Dr. Bob used to say is we're not supposed to be anonymous to each other, right? Anonymity is the spiritual foundation of our, but we're not to be anonymous to each other. So it says, Priscilla Peck, my treasured friend of AA, whose labor of love for us all will never be forgotten, right? And the labor of love is the grapevine, right? And that's a picture of Priscilla. I found that on eBay, believe it or not. The person selling it had no idea who they were. I even explained to him because it was too expensive for me. It was a whole stack of photos of Priscilla, Marty, a bunch of things, but he didn't know who they were. So I told him, I said, I can't afford this, but just want to let you know, blah, blah, blah. This is who she was. This is who, and he had them mixed up. He had the names mixed up. I couldn't stand it. So I said, well, someone's going to enjoy these. I want to make sure they land in the right place. They never sold. So like 6 months later, I contacted him and said, okay, well, I can afford this. So I was able to buy them all. And then I donated them to Stepping Stones because I used to always think like people would come to my house to see them. No one's coming to my garage in San Francisco, but they do go to Stepping Stones. So that's the right place for them to be. And then a year later, Bill inscribed this book to Marty. It said, Marty, dear, though I love you for many things, I'm thinking now what you put into Grapevine and what that is to mean to so many. I just love that. I love his affection towards her. Now, this is a daily news from New York paper, and it says New York drinks 1945 out and 1946 in. Says AA revel is bone dry. This is, anyway, one big dry all-night party was that of Alcoholics Anonymous. The organization held a dance at its clubhouse, 405 West 41st Street. There was nothing to drink but coffee and Coke, but the former drinkers did a lot of eating. Supper was from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. and breakfast from 3 a.m. to 8 a.m. 750 persons danced to swing music, and boy, do they feel better than you and I this morning. So just a great little write-up, and I love the thought of them doing swing dance. I love the fact that they're eating from 3 a.m. I mean, these people knew how to party, but I really love that they tell us the address. Now, this clubhouse doesn't exist anymore. The other thing is the map, you all probably know this, but it took me a while to figure out that a map in 1945 looks different than a map in 2026. So I found a 1945 map and was able to figure out that this is where the clubhouse was. But look at Times Square is just 2 blocks away. What a fantastic location for their AA clubhouse, because I'm quite sure there were quite a few alcoholics hanging around Times Square. And there's later a story that I give in my LGBTQ talk about someone that wandered in off the street that heavily influenced Tradition 3. And I'm quite sure they had come directly from Times Square. So Des Moines, I recently spoke in Des Moines, Iowa, and this is an article they had in their paper in 1946, Women Who Battle the Bottle of the Known Alcoholics, etc. But the main reason I put this is I love the thought of our parents or grandparents opening up a newspaper and seeing an image like that and being like, oh, look at Mrs. Marty Mann. And it's interesting, it says, if you're snobbish about such things, you might be impressed by the fact that Mrs. M didn't drink until after she made her debut, was finished abroad, and served time in the junior league. So they're saying, it's not just poor people. The very wealthy are also alcoholics, and they can also benefit from AA. So now this is a great photo of Marty. Just look at that hat. I'm quite sure Priscilla working at Vogue had something to do with that hat. Says Marty's now speaking 250 times per year on behalf of the National Council to provide education, information, and referrals for their respective communities. And one of the things, I had the same sponsor for the first 39 years of my sobriety. I was very, very lucky. Her name is Ruth S., and she came from Oklahoma. And Oklahoma is very different than California, but she was the best sponsor for me. And one of the things my sponsor, Ruth, pointed out, she said, when Marty would go and speak at these places, she'd be the only woman in the room. There weren't even women in the audience, right? There were no women that were part of the Detroit Economic Club. Everywhere she went, she'd often, especially public speaking, she'd be speaking mainly to men or exclusively. So I'm going to keep moving here. Now, what about the traditions? Okay, this requires a sip of water. Okay. Our 11th tradition tells us our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. Well, 1944 is when Marty founded the National Council. 1947, 48, that's when the traditions are published, one by one in the Grapevine magazine. 1950, that's when they were adopted in Cleveland, Ohio at the first International Convention. And in 1953, that's when the 12 and 12 was published. So a lot of people criticize Marty Mann because they say, well, she was out there, breaking her anonymity, and she was not a good AA. But what I have to say is that you can't break a tradition if it hasn't even been written, right? She's out there in 1944. It's not even adopted until 1950. That's 6 long years. Now, granted, is AA called Alcoholics Anonymous? Yes, it is. So it's not like anonymity was a totally foreign concept, but also The other thing I'd say is that Bill Wilson was her sponsor. She wasn't doing anything that Bill Wilson was not completely aware of. So it's a fine line between trying to do public education like they did with the Saturday Evening Post, but not breaking your anonymity. As the years went by, definitely she reined it in, and she would not say she was a member of AA. But it's a little hard to get, once the cat's out of the bag, it's hard to get the cat back in the bag. You know what I mean? Once the entire country knows who you are and knows you're an AA, it's hard to kind of get that back. This was a very interesting diary entry that I found. In February 29th, 1948, you'll see at 8:30 p.m. it says a Negro AA meeting. And that was the most polite way to say either a Black AA meeting, African American AA meeting. That was the proper way. Negro AA meeting. It means she's speaking for 100 people. She kept detailed notes. But I felt like in this entry, there were more than usual because Marty was literally going city to city to city. I mean, every city in the country, Marty was there. And I really do imagine that she was connecting these people, saying, okay, in Philadelphia, there's a meeting. DC, what about Los Angeles? What about Oakland? What about New York? Different Black groups popping up, and she's helping to connect them, right? At this meeting, started by Jim Scott, different people have different thoughts about which is the first meeting, so I'm not going to get into that as far as the first Black group. But his story is Jim's story. He was actually a medical doctor, and so I thought that was very interesting. Now this is the National Council. For a while, it looked like they were going to fold. They still exist, by the way. They've changed their names over the years, but to include drugs and this and that. But Bill was writing her a supportive letter, and it says, believe me, I understand from his own experience of doing AA how hard it can be, and that but I see you rising phoenix-like from the ashes, the great flame you kindle, a flame whose warmth will be felt by many a generation of your brothers and sisters. And he says, God bless you and keep you, my dear girl. See me at any time you can. Affectionately, Bill. Right? I mean, that is the love of a sponsor, right? He always cared about her, and always supported her, as did Lois. She also added a note and said, your work in the National Committee has been so outstanding and so beneficial to the alcoholic that I hope you won't have any sense of failure now, because there's a chance of not having the money to go on. Many AAs don't understand how much you've helped the public to understand. Bill and I are proud of you, dear, and love you very much. Lois B. Wilson. I just love that. I love that letter. They were so generous and so kind. Now, this is a new slide, just especially for you. Bill Wilson went to Ireland in 1950, right? And they traveled all over. They said, I'm going to quote, it says, he's writing to Dr. Bob, says, we have been gone not quite 7 weeks now and have visited 4 cities in Norway, 3 in Sweden, 1 in Denmark, 2 in Holland, as well as Paris, London, and now Dublin, Ireland. Lois and I both wish, Smitty, that you could have seen and felt what we have on this journey. We need not tell you that AA has come to Europe to stay. With its usual ease, it is breaking down all barriers of race, creed, language, and tradition. Without much of any AA literature, a great job is being done, strongly reminiscent of our pioneering time at Akron, Cleveland, and New York. Though they have the advantage of our background of success, the groups start here under very different circumstances than a new group starts up shop at home. Like us in the early days, they can take nothing for granted. The public still knows nothing about them. The clergy and doctors, with a few exceptions, still wonder. And then it goes on. And that's from our history book, Pass It On, right? The thought of them, they weren't spring chickens. They're out there, going to all these countries, and travel isn't quite what it is as easy it is now. And there they were, place after place after place. I just, nothing but admiration for them. But what else is happening during this era that's especially relevant to Marty and Priscilla and the rest of the other early AAs? In the United States, we're having a big influx of homophobia, and it says, and it had to do with the McCarthy era anti-communism, and this idea that gay people could be blackmailed. That's the short story. So the main thing is that this is the kind of thing that would be in the paper every single day. So when they're reading their papers, they're like, uh-oh, this is not a good time to be gay. I'll leave it at that. But in the early days of AA, Barry Leach, he's the author of the book Living Sober. He was also a gay man. He was friends with with Marty and Priscilla. He said, quote, "We were not just closeted. We were in a vault holding on to each other's hands desperately. We recognized each other, of course. And by the way, Bill knew us all too. It never bothered Bill." Right? That is so important. I mean, when you think about that era, it is not 2026. We're talking about 1930s, 1940s. Back then, it was illegal to even mail, it was a big deal here in the United States when we first started being able to say, oh, there's a gay meeting, for example. And you couldn't even mail something that said the word gay because it would be considered pornography to even say the word gay. We're not talking about images, we're talking about words here, and so it was really a big deal to be accepting back then. And that influenced tradition 3. It says, "At last, experience taught us that to take away any alcoholic's full chance was sometimes to pronounce his death sentence, and often to condemn him to endless misery. Who dared to be judge, jury, and executioner of his own sick brother?" Right? That's tradition 3 in the 12 and 12. Now, Lori D., the woman in Santa Fe, sober since 1967, told me, "Marty said it was her mission to carry the message about alcoholism, and it was our generation's job to carry the message about homosexuality. I don't think she had internalized homophobia. Marty was fine with who she was. She was realistic and realistically fearful. The silence wasn't because she had shame about being a lesbian. The silence was because she knew there was danger both professionally and in those days physically. Back in the day, one of the ways they could have rendered her and her message impotent was to gay bash." So in other words, Marty was so invested in carrying the message about alcoholism, she said, "I'm not going to risk it." Now looking at maps, I was curious if Barry and his partner Spencer knew Marty and Priscilla, and yes, they did. Barry and Spencer lived at 100 Bank Street, and that's me. Look at being the dork that I am. I don't know if you're familiar with the word dork, but dork is like nerdy, ridiculous. That's me. I'm standing on the front porch of that's actually Marty's place, but I've also been to Barry's place because I can't stop myself. Anyway, so you see how close they lived, right? And then when I was looking at the map, I thought, look what pops up right in between, the Stonewall Inn. Briefly, the Stonewall Uprising took place June 28, 1969. That is why we have pride parades all around the world in June, all right? So the first pride parade, Christopher Street Liberation March, was 1970. But the reason that's relevant is that both Barry and Spencer and Marty and Priscilla were all living right there in Greenwich Village in 1969. Now, in no way am I saying that they were there, that they participated. There's no way in the world I could know that, and I doubt they were, just because it doesn't, I don't know. I just would assume not. But they were living in the gayest neighborhood in America. So even though we see Marty Mann as being someone who is very, very closeted, you're not that closeted if you're living in the gayest neighborhood in America. So there's that. So just to put that in perspective. This is their home. That's Priscilla on the left, Marty in the middle. She's now writing her first book, and she dedicates it to Priscilla Peck, who made me write it all down. That book in particular is also at Stepping Stones. And they also have this. It says, she then inscribed these books to Bill and Lois. These are ones that she wrote. "For Bill and Lois Wilson, without whose affection, understanding, and knowledge, not one word of this book would have been written, for I would not be here. Marty." The next book she wrote, "To Bill and Lois, my beloved family. Marty." So you see how close they were. Now here's a love letter to Marty from Priscilla. It says, "Darling, I love you up, down, in, out, now, then, forever. No sea, sky, land, bog, flotsam, jetsam, or whatnot can harm or separate us. All love, P. Love and kisses to Bunny the hero and Taffy. Now, I have it on good authority that these are corgis, I believe Welsh corgis. And here they are. This is Marty's mother sitting closest to the camera. That's Marty on the right. This is a woman named LeClaire Bissell, who would go on, also a very important person in AA history. Here she has 1 year of sobriety. Marty's her sponsor, and that's Priscilla to the left. And they are at the home in Greenwich Village. This is a book that was translated into Afrikaans. I was able to find that. She also dedicated that one to Priscilla, and she wrote a special foreword for the African version. And yeah, that's pretty neat. Now, the second edition book, that's when Marty's story came in. Marty's story is called Women Suffer Too. She's in the second, third, and fourth edition. And I did hear from someone who's involved in these type of things at a higher level, way higher level than me, and says Marty's story will remain in the fifth edition. I'm just so excited. I don't want to get my hopes up until I see it. But, you know, it's very important that we rotate stories, but I don't ever want to lose Marty's story. So anyway, that's her story. Now, this was fascinating. I mean, how Marty got around the world is a mystery to me. But in 1956, while in Rome, Marty had a private audience with the Pope. And then it's very interesting. It's because this was important because a lot of Catholics in the United States back then, in the early days, there were concerns from the Catholic Church about the idea that the fourth step and fifth step, and is that confession, and to do it with anyone other than a priest. There were concerns about that. But when she met with the Pope, and I'm not saying that Marty changed everything, no, but this certainly helped. And it says, a further conference with Bishop O'Connor indicated that this event would have far-reaching consequences in the cooperation of the Catholic Church with the modern approaches to alcoholism symbolized by NCA and by Mrs. Mann as its representative. So again, very amazing. You know, she's come a long way from the asylum, right? Now here she is in St. Louis. I love this. It says, briefly, it says, would you do it all again? You know, or what would you do different if you were 20 again? This United Nations delegate said, I would learn more languages. And Marty said, I would go through the nightmare all over again if I had to do what I'm able to do today. Meaning if I had to, I would go through it all again. You know, now I'm excited. This is the 1958 Grapevine. It's March. I'm assuming that's why it's for St. Patrick's Day. That's why they have the little shamrock and everything. And this is the article. I feel like I need to speed along here, but it's just an article with the National Council. Now, Marty did have a very brief relapse in 1959. She drank something called bitters, which is sort of not a gray area. It's definitely alcohol, but it was sort of, we don't know, but that led to her drinking. It was not public knowledge. You know, I think she kept it. It says what precipitated the drinking is unknown, but the accumulating stressors of her work, her health, the long illness of her mother, the deaths of her parents would be dangerous signals for the ordinary recovering alcoholic. And I think it's easy to forget that Marty was a very low bottom, hardcore alcoholic, you know. And so, you know, she did run into trouble, and but she got back on track, started traveling again, went to Australia, went to New Zealand, is carrying the message. These are some things I found in Syracuse. This is a funny cartoon where this guy comes up to a bartender, and this was in the Melbourne Herald, and it says, I've read so much about the effects of alcoholism and Mrs. Marty Mann, I've decided to give up reading. So she was definitely becoming well known. This is in Reader's Digest, a very popular magazine back then. And it says, what the alcoholic owes to Marty Mann, right? And that's very true. So this, and says by mid-November, so she's coming, you know, she's kind of getting herself back together. It says by mid-November of 1964, Marty Mann was back in full circulation. She returned to England for several strenuous weeks, and this time Scotland and Ireland as well, to help kick off a British campaign to raise £750,000 for establishing information and research programs to address alcoholism. Just last night, I found these articles in the Irish Independent, 1964. She went to both Belfast and Dublin, which I thought was very interesting on this campaign. And the same visit, it talks about just different articles discussing it. One thing I thought was kind of jumped out at me, and this is one thing, the thing she always would say is that that alcoholism is a disease and that the alcoholic is a sick person and the alcoholic can be helped and is worth helping. And that's the story. She would say that a million times a day. That was her main message. The alcoholic is sick, the alcoholic can be helped, and they are worth helping. Do not just keep putting them in jail, right? But this lower part, I don't know what to think about this. She says, the Irish American, she said, had the highest incidence of alcoholism and the Jews the lowest. Why she threw that in, I'm not sure. I don't know. I just thought it was interesting. Oh, it says there were theories about this, but nobody knew why. So anyway, that's what they had to say about that. And then it says, this was very confusing to me. It sounds like they showed the film The Lost Weekend and then maybe had speakers. And again, this is the same visit, 64, says, the program was spoiled by too much claptrap and thumbing of noses and discourteous side play to the audience, some of it recorded on the screen. No wonder Mrs. Mann was invited back on Newsbeat to make the informative comment on alcoholism that she might have contributed to the Late Late Show if plain speaking had been allied to good manners. So again, not exactly sure what happened there, but it sounded like a movie and the people got carried away. So anyway, then 1965, the Sunday Independent, it says the alcoholic in the family, and it briefly mentions Marty Mann having visited the year before. 1967, she's back in Ireland, and it says the biography tells us, regardless of depression, Marty kept forging ahead. In 1967, she repeated her trip to England and Ireland to speak on behalf of the British and Irish National Councils on Alcoholism. So here are the articles, and they're celebrating the 21st anniversary Irish groups of AA. And they talk a bit about how AA started there, and it says the figure of 60,000 alcoholics in Ireland was about average for the country's population. Mrs. Marty Mann, director, etc. And it says he spoke and this and that. The second article says that just they refer to her as a doctor, which I thought was interesting. Yeah, she gets referred as a lot of things, but a doctor, that was a first. And this is a photo of her in Ireland. I've never seen this photo of her, and that was really neat. She's in Dublin, and it's listed as being, sounds like she's mainly with doctors here. And they're saying that the family doctor is the key man in helping the alcoholic. So, that's sort of how we do with professionals, to try to get to integrate AAs and educate them. Now, this was another article that I thought was interesting. This author, I was never heard of him, but Constantine Fitzgibbon, and he wrote these two books that are apparently well known. And he joined AA, and he talked about listening to tapes they would listen to when he went to treatment. And this is in 1988. I'm sorry, 1980, the year that she died. But anyway, he's talking about alcoholism and this and that and listening to tapes of Marty Mann. Now, the big question. People are very, very interested usually in who really was the first woman in AA. And I'm going to disappoint you, so get ready. Oh. The short answer is we don't really know. But I'll tell you about these women. There's Florence R. I have a whole talk about her. She's the only woman in the first edition Big Book. There's Marty, who you are now officially all experts on Marty Mann, so go and spread the word. There's a great woman named Sylvia Kay. She wrote Keys to the Kingdom, a really wonderful story. She brought it to Chicago. Then there's Sybil C., first woman west of the Mississippi. You can see their dates below on the screen. She's a kick in the pants. She was, if you can find, there's many audio recordings of her. She's very interesting. Ethel M., the first woman in Akron, and her story is from farm to city. So, the thing is, was Marty the first woman to set foot in AA? No, definitely not. We don't know who the first, there's other women in different lists. A woman named Jane, Mary, Edith, Hazel, Helen, all women who were in that same time or even maybe before Marty. You know, if I had to choose one, I'm going to say Florence because she's the only woman in the first edition. But we really don't know. We also, there's also things, well, who's the first Black woman, the first Latina woman, the first Asian woman, first woman? And I guess what I really want to emphasize is that there was always a first, and all of these women, they were all the first in their town. Same thing. First woman in Dublin, first woman in London, first woman in, Scotland. I mean, every place there's a first, same thing, first man, first this and that. So, I mean, all of these people really all these history, all these people, early AAs deserve our respect. And I wouldn't say that one deserves more than the other. But this is what Marty had to say. This was from the 25th anniversary convention in was 1960. And this is what she wrote. She said, when I attended my first AA meeting on April 11th, 1939, I was the only woman alcoholic there. And I might not have been there had there not been one before me whose story I had read in the manuscript of a book called Alcoholics Anonymous. As soon as I decently could, I asked about the woman whose story was in the book. She was much older than I, with grown children. Her name was Florence. No one seemed to know her except Bill and Lois, for she was in Washington, where one of the earliest members of the group, a man named Fitz, was trying to get something started. He was having a rough time, for all the prospects, including Florence, kept getting drunk. I breathed a prayer of thanks that she had stayed sober long enough to write her story for me. Marty Mann, right? And I'm sure many of you have had this experience. Sometimes the person that carries the message to us maybe doesn't make it themselves. Right? Right. So it's not just about who lasts the longest. It's not about who has the most sobriety. People carry the message in so many different ways. Now, Bill Wilson died January 24th, 1971. I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to keep moving forward. But Marty did speak at his memorial, and they read the promises, they read the steps, and I love that we know that. And this is, we're getting right near the end here. This is an audio recording, the last recording of Marty. She died 3 weeks later. She spoke at the International 1980 Convention in New Orleans, and this is what she had to say.
Pretty hard to find my voice around this room. I can't tell what it feels like to be a great grandmother to so many women. That's the thought. Oh, it is. You're my children, and I'm so, so proud of you.
Right? She says, you're my children, and I'm so, so proud of you. So she was 75 years old when she died, and she had her obituary in the New York Times, which many women did not. Back then, most women did not have their status of the New York Times. And it's very interesting. Priscilla, her partner of 40 years, is not mentioned in the obituary, but you know who is mentioned? Her husband of 3 months. Remember John Blakemore, like an hour ago? I told you about that dude. He's mentioned in her obituary. So that is just indicative of how history can sort of be manipulated and how people can disappear. Now, I was able to go to both these places. She had 2 memorials, one in New York City, one in Connecticut, where she was living at the end of her life. I was able. This is the what's it called? The program. This is what they read and everything. And recently I spoke in Chicago, and I finally got to go to Marty Mann's gravesite. That was such a blessing. And Priscilla outlived Marty by 2 years, and Marty's brother watched over Priscilla, and he tried to have their ashes buried together, but the cemetery would not allow it because they were not considered family. Right? Even after 40 years, even in 1980, they were not considered family, even though her biological family wanted the ashes put there. They would not allow it. So I've done a few things to try to revive the history. I did write this Grapevine article that came out last year that talks about Marty, and I'm so happy to continue to give this talk anywhere. If you have a conference, you'd like me to come to either by Zoom or in person, I'd love to travel. I'm happy to try at least. I am going to be coming to Florida pretty soon for their state convention. And if you happen to be in Florida, I think a lot of you are in Europe today or around this. I'm going to be in Texas for Labor Day. And then I'm going to be in Vermont. And if you get on my email list, which I'm going to put in the chat, or WhatsApp, you can, whatever works is fine by me. I'm going to be giving it. This is where Bill Wilson was born, the Wilson House in Vermont. I'll be doing that at the end of October. So thank you very much. I'm going to end this sharing, and I appreciate you listening. All right, that's it. Yay.
Miley, that was great, but I could hear it. But unfortunately, we've a gang here at the moment. My granddaughter had her communion today, and they just wouldn't shut up for 5 minutes. So, but it's all good. It's all good. I appreciate your time. I appreciate what you've done here for us. And as you said, you're going to be back again in a few weeks to us, and we'll go into negotiations then about other stuff. So again, thanks a million. I love the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, and especially when it has anything to do with Ireland. That always helps.
Oh,
Nice.
So I'm going to hand it over to Mick there.
Miley, thank you. You know, you showed so much, and the enthusiasm you have for this fellowship, wonderful. We need people like you. You know, my first sponsor met Lois,
Oh, wow.
and my wife went to her Lois's memorial in London.
Wow.
You know, because she was in Al-Anon 40 years before she died.
Wow.
Yeah. And, you know, it's fantastic. You've shown me so much here today. Sue S. is going to do the promises.
Thank you. Thanks, Mick. Sue, alcoholic, the promises. If we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue, for that. And thanks, Stephen, for the preamble. Thanks, Mick, for being my sidekick. And thanks, Karen, for your timekeeping. You didn't do it very well today, but we'll say nothing about that. Miley, it was fantastic having you with us. Looking forward to having you again. And we might see about booking you for another date as well while we have you. So that's it, Mick.
Right. Reminder that we have a meeting on 7 days a week at 8:30 a.m. UK time. We also have a meeting every Sunday at 6:30 p.m. UK time. This is a meditation meeting.
Saturdays, of course, we have the old timers at 6 o'clock, and which is a recorder. It's old timers, whatever it ends up to be. Today was story time for Marty Mann. Thursdays we have a meeting at 7:30, and at 6:30 on Sunday we have a step 11 meditation meeting, and all our meetings have the same code. So that's it. The yellow card. Who you see here?
What you hear here,
When you leave here,
let it stay here.
and that's it, folks. As they say in Hollywood, that's a wrap. So all we got to do now is get Miley to lead us out with the serenity prayer. And so you lead us out there, Miley, and thanks a million again.
Yes, I agree.
I thought we did the serenity prayer, but maybe I've been talking too much. But all right, let's do it. God,
God, grant
grant
us
me the serenity
Because we cannot change it. Courage to change the things we can.
the
The wisdom to know the difference.
Thank you all. Miley, God bless you.